Now we're going to get started on the war in the Pacific. And what we're going to focus on for this sort of section is the campaign in the Pacific. So we've already finished the war in Europe. But just remember, though, it didn't, it's not like the war finished in Europe first and then it continued on in the Pacific. This stuff is going on at the same time. We've just we need to finish out one section and then continue on and talk about the other. So remember, we're going to be doing this like flipping back and forth. That said, we need to go over what the campaign is, at least what the strategy is for fighting in the Pacific. The term that is used to describe the type of fighting is right here. It says right here, island hopping. General Douglas Macarthur is the one that's going to be leading those missions in the Pacific, and island hopping essentially is the strategy that you would go from island to island, fighting the Japanese, and the object of it is to get closer and closer to the main island in Japan. And so, during the first couple of years of the war, the United States was dealt a lot of losses. It was very difficult, especially because we're concentrating our efforts in Europe. But in addition to that, we have here Douglas MacArthur, who was essentially forced out of the Philippines, but he vows that he will return. And in 1942, he's able to do that. So MacArthur is going to be leading the way here. I want to talk about just a couple of some of these battles. We're not going to talk about all of them, but just the significance of what happens at the Coral Sea, how they're able to sort of slow down the progress of the Japanese, is sort of an indicator of how difficult the fighting was and how challenging it was, especially for the Americans, to be fighting out there. Sometimes it just seemed like they were there by themselves, and to a certain degree, that is certainly true. But there is this fighting in Bataan, okay, which is this right here. The Bataan Death March, where, this battle is going to end with the Japanese being victorious, and they take a group of American POWs with them, and they force them on this, death march, 24 hours a day, no eating, no sleeping, no rest. And, throughout the war, that for somebody to invoke Bataan, like to say Bataan, is almost like kind of reminiscent of the way that people would use remember the Alamo, remember Goliad, as a sort of symbol for the opponent's cruelty. And Bataan is most definitely going to go down as a symbol of Japanese cruelty towards the POWs in this case. So it really got people's attention. And it sort of shows that what lengths the Japanese are willing to go to. They're not going to give up. They're really brutal in nature, but like I said, we're gonna come back to that a little bit later, when the decision has to be made on whether or not to use the bomb. Okay, so keep that in mind. Bataan, symbol of Japanese cruelty, the type of fighting that's going on. It's very difficult. And what else can I tell you about it? Well, one of the first victories, if not the first victory that the Americans are able to get, is at the Battle of Midway. Okay, this one also takes place in 1942. And the significance with Midway, of course, is, Midway, the island, is literally like midway from the Pacific, in the Pacific Ocean, from the United States to Asia. And at Midway, this is the first of many victories for the United States. But here, they are essentially able to stop the Japanese advance. Okay, so remember how, once they set off the attack on Pearl Harbor and simultaneous attacks on U.S. Territories as well as British acquisitions, they're basically going to spread out. And they are going to like I said, kick out the Americans from that area. And now it's our turn to kind of like start pushing them back in at the Coral Sea, Solomon Islands, Midway, all of this. And what we're doing is we're slowly sort of creeping up, coming back in. But Midway is the first actual victory of many more to come. But this is where, the Americans are starting to realize something. That the type of fighting that they are encountering is, like brutal on many instances, but also the mentality of the Japanese is like they're not going to be taken prisoner. They will fight until the last man is standing. And what that means is an incredible amount of casualties. Okay, they have that kind of mindset where being captured is a dishonorable thing, and it's going to make the fighting really, really intense and difficult. Okay, to win. I want to move on to just very briefly mention that the Philippines are going to be recaptured in October 1944. So that is a big plus for the United States, because now they can position themselves in the area. But we're not done yet. We got to talk about Iwo Jima. Okay, Iwo Jima, the fighting there is going to happen from mid-February to mid-March of 1945. Iwo Jima is a non-inhabited island, so nobody lives there, except it's important because it has a radar station in there on the island. And so radar, of course, you needed to be able to track, movements of not just positioning of your ships and your personnel, but as well as the enemy, and so it's very, very important for both sides to have and to control Iwo Jima. And as an extent of that, the Japanese are going to fight till the last man, essentially, in order to defend it. Really vicious fighting. The American casualties at Iwo Jima are about 7,000. Okay, so it's quite a lot. Next comes Okinawa, and this is an inhabited island. People do live there. It's about 2.5 months of fighting in Okinawa. But again, the fact that an entire brigade of 100,000 men is wiped out before the fighting is over really goes to the mentality that these guys are not going to give up. They are not going to surrender. They are not going to stop. They will not be taken prisoner. And so it makes the fighting very difficult. Instead of surrendering or anything like that, which would halt the fighting, they are not. And so every single victory that the Americans are able to get during this time is hard fought. It comes with a lot of sacrifices, a lot of casualties, a lot of men are going to have to, pay the ultimate price here. And so those are some of the things that the United States has to consider, because, if we're going to win this thing, it's going to cost a lot of men. It's going to take a lot of time. And what's going to speed up that process a little bit is the development of the atomic bomb. Okay, let's talk about that real quick. Just a second.